everybody. My name is Amanda Turnage. I am a background painter on Star Trek Lower Decks, and you're listening to Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. One of the highlights of the many new Trek shows that launched in the past few years for me has easily been Star Trek Lower Decks. I'm an animation fan, and this series has the perfect amount of fan service and actual Trek to make it exactly what I want out of a Trek cartoon. A lot of comparisons were drawn to it being like Star Trek does Rick and Morty, and while I know for certain that the show is meant to be the Trek equivalent of that Adult Swim series, I also think that Lower Decks has really come into its own, and by Season 3, it should really be standing on its own merits completely. This week, we have our first behind-the-scenes person from Lower Decks, and that's artist Amanda Turnage. Amanda is a background painter on Lower Decks, a job that requires an intricate attention to detail, color theory, and understanding space and perspective to make a convincing location for the animated characters to interact within. Amanda's career has been very diverse, and her time in the animation industry has also included working as a character designer on Moonbeam City, a color stylist on Turbo Fast, visual development artist on Trolls The Beat Goes On and Cleopatra in Space, and work in a lot of other series as a freelancer with DreamWorks, Titmouse, and Universal Animation. It's rare for someone to jump around in so many different roles in animation, but as you're going to hear today, Amanda is wildly talented and has a lot of great insight into her work and the industry. This is also Amanda's first time ever being on a podcast, so I am happy to say we have another person to add to the Trek Untold list of firsts. And I can assure you all that she did a great job handling my barrage of questions. So let's get ready to meet our first guest from the world of animation and part of the amazing team that makes Star Trek Lower Decks happen, Amanda Turnage. But before we begin this week's episode, I want to remind you about the different ways that you can support Trek Untold. If you're in a position to help us financially, we have a Patreon page at patreon.com/trekuntold, where you can support us for as little as $2 a month. Joining on higher levels allows you to have early access to the latest episodes, knowing in advance who our guests will be before anybody else finds out, or even the chance to submit questions to some of those future guests, and maybe your question might be heard on that episode. Shout out to our sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions, who create 3D printed toys and prop replicas inspired by Star Trek. Their items come in all shapes and all sizes and are always amazing, but you're going to hear a little bit more about them later on in the show. But most importantly, I need you to leave a review and rating on iTunes or wherever you're listening to Trek Untold. 5-star ratings and positive reviews help this show pop up when new listeners search for Star Trek podcasts and make sure that they know they're listening to something that is worth their time. If you're watching this episode in video format on YouTube, please leave a thumbs up, share the video, and of course, comment there as well. Interacting on all these platforms is a guaranteed way to spread the word about Trek Untold. So if you've been a fan of this show, please do take action in whatever way you can and help make sure that Trek Untold can reach more listeners just like you who are going to love this type of content. And don't forget to follow us on our social media pages, which includes Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. All you need to do is type in @TrekUntold on any of those platforms, search for us that way, and you will find us just like that. You can also watch the video version of this episode on our YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to at youtube.com/nerdnewstoday. The video versions are released on Sundays, so the audio version will always come first, but if you prefer watching it, that's the way to do it. We also do a lot of other Trek-related content there, including toy and book reviews and plenty of other stuff, so you might want to take a look too, just so you can indulge and get yourself a new daily dose of Trek nerddom however way you like to get it. Now, without further ado, let's bring in this week's guest and get this episode started. Computer, beam in this week's guest. And welcome back to Trek Untold, and now joining us on the other side of the screen here, we've got Amanda Turnage, our very first person in the animation industry we're talking to on Trek Untold. Amanda, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm very excited to chat with you because I've always wanted to do animation. I've done a little bit on the amateur level, but originally my whole thing in college is I wanted to go into animation and storyboarding. Things happened, it got all weird, but I still love talking to animators and learning about what you guys do, and I'm super excited. So let's just go ahead and jump right on in here. And Amanda, what's your earliest memory of Star Trek?
My earliest memory of Star Trek is watching it with my dad. Back when Next Gen was coming out, I just remember, my dad would come home from work, we'd all have dinner. And afterwards, if it was a Star Trek night, we'd, go into the TV room and like cuddle up and watch some Star Trek. I think we watched Deep Space Nine as well. Yeah, it was just like a really fond memory, just bonding with my dad over something nerdy.
Now, was your family like big Star Trek nerdy fan folk, or not so much?
I mean, not so much. I think my dad was, a big Star Trek fan. I think my brothers were more, of the Star Wars leaning, and my mom kind of wasn't necessarily interested in sci-fi stuff. So I think it was mostly just me and my dad that were the Star Trekkers.
All right, cool. Now, I'd like to get a little bit of background information about you. So, can you tell us where you grew up, what your parents did, and what you wanted to be when you grew up?
So I grew up in the Bay Area, like a little bit outside of San Francisco, in a city called San Mateo. My parents, my dad was kind of a businessman. I don't quite remember what he did specifically. He worked for a company called Itron, and he was head of sales, I think, for that company. So just business, he'd wear a suit and carry a briefcase and go do business, and that was my dad. And my mom was an accountant, and she also there was a few years where she was a stay-at-home mom. So those were my parents, and I also had two older brothers, John and Chris, and a cat named Nikki. So that was my family. Growing up, I didn't really, consider art a career that I could do. I think when I was really young, around middle school, I wanted to become a veterinarian. So I was watching a lot of like Animal Planet and like emergency vet shows and things like that. And it wasn't until I went to high school and I started kind of digging more into art. I was watching a lot of anime back then and drawing a lot. And that's when I started, wanting to kind of pursue art as a career.
It's kind of fun because you basically have parents who are working in the most non-artistic thing possible, basically tech and accounting. That's like the opposite of what artists really want to do in their life.
Yes. Yes. I think they were, a little disappointed when I, went from wanting to be a veterinarian to an artist, but they've still been incredibly supportive to me in, my endeavors to become, working in animation. And they've always been such a wonderful, loving, supportive source for me. So I'm grateful for having them as my parents.
Now, did you go to art school once you finished high school, or did you do something else first?
I originally went to school for fine art. That was the original plan. Yeah, it wasn't until I moved down to Los Angeles. I think, after I graduated from UC Davis, I kind of didn't know what to do with my life. I was kind of just working, administrative jobs. I made the decision just to move down to Los Angeles because it was just something new. It's just such a creative city. There's so much, entertainment wise, there's just so much going on down here. And I just wanted to be around more people like myself, just people more creatively driven. So when I moved down here, I kind of, again, was kind of struggling just to kind of find my place. I had a job at UCLA that didn't pan out. And I was unemployed for a little bit in around 2009, 2010 during the recession. It was a bit rough. I ended up temping at several different, businesses, law firms, accounting firms, entertainment studios like Fox and CBS. And eventually I decided to just go back to school and go into potentially game design to try and take my artistic skills and put them towards like a practical career. And eventually game design kind of, I enjoyed doing game design, but we also had the animation major that was going on in the same school. I was going to the Art Institute at the time. And I just remember just kind of gravitating more towards those classes and those groups of people and those professors, and ended up switching majors. So that's kind of how I eventually kind of found my way into an animation major.
So it was basically kind of more just the practicality of potentially getting more work. That was kind of the initial theory behind it.
Yeah. I like the idea of having a job where I was doing something that I, enjoyed. And who doesn't, doing administrative work for so many years, it just wasn't fulfilling anymore. I wasn't really connecting too much with my peers there. I've definitely made a lot of friends in some of those jobs, but I just, I would look over at people who are working in those entertainment jobs, and I was just like, I want to be there. I want to work, somewhere in there, and I want to be around more creative people and more creative minds. And yeah, that's kind of ended up what drove me to kind of just start going back to school and just try and make this work.
So you're coming from a fine arts background, which means you've got a really amazing foundation in basically life drawing, observational skills, these kinds of really important things, anatomy. But then there's
Mhm.
also a lot of technical skills you've now got to learn in animation. So for you, like, what was the hardest thing to adapt to in this new major?
Um, let's see. I did take a course on perspective,
Mm.
and I struggle with perspective. It's very difficult for me to wrap my brain around that. It's probably why I'm not a background layout artist and I'm a background painter instead. But that and color theory too, especially with background painting, you have to be really good with color. So just learning all of the, complementary colors versus, your values and contrasting colors and things like that. I was, um, really really learning about what makes something look appealing um, was an interesting and challenging part of school.
So you mentioned you're an anime fan, and I'm sure you probably are just a fan of animation in general too. Even at that point, as you were getting your toes wet to the professional side of things. But were there any artists or any shows or things that you kind of liked that you really enjoy that you said like, I want to do what they're doing, and I kind of want to maybe look maybe a little bit like what their style is?
Well, definitely after I had moved down to Los Angeles, I think that was around when How to Train Your Dragon came out at DreamWorks, and I fell in love with that movie. I thought it was so gorgeous, and I ended up getting the art book, and a lot of the illustrations in there were from an artist named Nico Marley. He's a French character designer that works at DreamWorks, and he's one of their kind of go-to character designers. I found his work very inspiring, and it definitely, inspired me to want to get more into, you know, animation and design and working in animation in general. Yeah, it's definitely, I would say he was a major player in that. In terms of like other illustrators that I really admired, a lot of comic book artists too. Speaking of like Japanese artists, Naoko Takeuchi and Clamp was a big influence for me also growing up. They did, Magic Knight Ray Earth and Cardcaptor Sakura and those amazing comics. And let's see who else. There's Marguerite Sauvage and James Jean. Just very detail oriented illustrators are some of my inspirations, especially just for my own personal work. It's not really translatable into animation because the more like detailed and fine lined it is, it's kind of not as practical for animation. But yeah, for my personal illustrations, those are who I'm inspired by.
So do you remember what your first professional gig was once you were done with school?
Let's see, first professional gig. Once I finished so I guess there's like going to be a two-parter because there was my first professional gig when I finished fine art, and then my first professional gig when I finished animation. My first professional gig finishing my fine arts degree was I got hired to do a children's book, and I was very green back then. I really didn't know how to price my own work, and ended up underselling myself a little bit and ended up not getting paid very much for doing a lot of work. That was definitely, a learning point for me in my career where I had to learn, to price my work, based on how much time it took to make it, not based on, how big or, I think about a lot of like the young artists that enter our industry or selling prints or trying to sell their work, and they just underprice it, selling something that maybe took them 5 hours to create and selling it for $25, and you break down the numbers on that, it's they're selling something that was a $5 an hour endeavor, and you always have to think about those things, like make sure that you're pricing your work based on how much time it took you and how much of your own, uh, tools you were using to make it, and your, um, just make sure you're selling things based on your worth. You're a worthy artist.
Which is easier said than done in a lot of ways. Because I remember I went to Comic-Con with a friend who really doesn't know anything at all about the art world, and we were walking through
Mhm.
Artist Alley, and she was looking at like people selling prints and even original artwork, and she just wouldn't buy anything. She thought everything was overpriced. And we're talking about like even little like index card original drawings for like $25. She's like, I'd pay $5 for it. And I'm curious to hear also
Yeah.
what my listeners will think about this kind of thing too, because I think the value that we place in art is very something that society doesn't really get in a lot of ways. Like some
Yeah.
people get it, other people just don't. They just will refuse to ever understand that it took hours to do something, and it's worth more than $20. So
Yeah, yeah. You have to think about, I always think about hourly rate as kind of like a standard. It's like if it took you this many hours to make, then you should price it based on what your hourly rate would be. But then you also have to think about, yes, it took this many hours to make, and maybe it's a sketch that only took the artist like 20 minutes to just bust out really quick. But you have to think about all the years they took to learn how to do that. They went to school, they went to college, they put all this effort and money into learning that skill. And so you have to kind of factor that into what you're paying for. You're paying for art. You're not just paying for something somebody just threw down really quick. Like it's you're paying for their skill.
and do you remember what your first animation gig was?
My first animation gig was at Titmouse, actually. I was still at school at the time, and I got an internship working for Titmouse. It was kind of an odd job. It was some project we were doing for I think it was Amazon, and it was coloring in animatics. I think for their marketing research. I'm not sure what the specifics were on that, but all I remember was that I was coloring animatics, coloring in. And I think that's what, I was able to showcase my abilities to just kind of like work with color really well. And from there, they offered me a job on King Star King, which was my first, actual television show that I got to work on. And that one was like an adult swim show. And I did color design for that one.
And that was a J.J. Villard show too, right?
That was, yes.
He has got to be an interesting character, I'd imagine, considering his work is pretty far out there.
Yeah, yeah, he was such a joy to work for, though. He really loved his artists and he loved his team. I've never met anybody so hyped to work in the industry and to create what he wanted to create. He was quite the creative genius, and yeah, quite a character to work with. He was always such a blast to be around.
Now, as you're coming up in the industry too, I mean, did you get any mentors, if you will? Was there anybody there that was like kind of like maybe taking you under their wing, kind of showing you the ropes, and really taught you something that you continue to use this day?
Oh yeah, sure. After I worked on King Star King, I got hired onto Moonbeam City. Initially, I was working on that show as a color designer, but at some point they needed help with character designs. And the lead character designer on that show, her name was Jojo Park, and I became her assistant and was promoted to the role of just helping her turn her characters. So she would design the characters, and then I would take them. I would kind of like do the side view, the front view, the back view, etc. And I learned so much from her about character design, especially character design turning, which is really, really difficult to do it precisely. And she had all these like really great tricks for how to do it efficiently and quickly. And I still use those tricks today. And when I'm doing character design work. And also she was just like this really fun, amazing person to be around. So yeah, I'm really grateful for, all I got to learn from her. And she was definitely one of my first mentors.
So let's get real granular here. Let's actually talk about what those tips and tricks were, because I am very interested in the whole turning thing. If people don't know what that is, I'm going to have examples in our video version. But that's essentially when you turn a character, how they have to stay on model, which means they need to look exactly the same as they did when they were in their front view, in their three-quarter view, in their profile view from behind. So that is something that is, as you mentioned, very, very difficult to do and do it consistently. So what are some of the tricks of the trade that any aspiring animators out there listening today can learn?
Oh, geez.
Putting you on the spot now.
I know. I'm just like, some of it's hard to describe without having like the Cintiq in front of me. It's like you do it this and you just copy and she taught me, I think one of the tricks she taught me, in order to keep things, with a character turn, everything has to be very level. So, all the eyes have to line up, under the nose, it all has to line up. The chin all has to line up. So that when it turns, nothing's like kind of jumping around. Before I learned under JoJo, I was kind of like drawing that horizontal line and then like trying to draw the character at side view next to the 3/4 and just kind of being like, is it matching? And she taught me to, turn those characters on top of each other, to make them transparent, put the character, the side view on top of the front view, and to kind of draw it that way. And to also reuse a lot of my lines from the 3/4. So, if I was using, if I needed the arm and I needed to use it in the side view, I just take the arm off the 3/4 and slap it on the side view and then just kind of like adjust it. So that even your lines are just like exact and matching up. So yeah, it made the process much faster. And especially on a show where it was just like we had to get stuff out really quick, it just made things way more speedy.
That's a damn good tip. I'm stealing that one.
Stealing my secrets.
Trek Untold will return momentarily.
Trek Untold is brought to you by Triple Fiction Productions. Triple Fiction Productions produces affordable and unique 3D printed Trek-inspired products from the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the movies. Ranging from prop replicas to use in a fan film or cosplay, to accessories or playsets for figures in all different sizes, Triple Fiction Productions has got you covered. Past pieces for toys have included large centerpieces like 10 Forward from the Enterprise D, shuttlecrafts complete with working lights, and the Voyager Bridge, with smaller pieces including Borg alcoves, the Genesis device, and the dreaded arch-enemy of Worf, barrels. All highly detailed products are 3D printed and hand-painted in the USA, with new items added all the time, while simultaneously improving their printing quality based on fan feedback. To learn more about their products, visit triple-fictionproductions.net or visit them on Facebook at facebook.com/triplefictionproductions. Want to get 10% off your next purchase? Use code UNTOLD10 at checkout to receive this discount. Not applicable during sales or clearance events. That's code UNTOLD10 to get 10% off action figure dioramas, accessories, and prop replicas. Triple Fiction Productions, taking Star Trek where no 3D printer has gone before.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Frakes. If you're of a certain age, you may remember me as Commander Riker from Star Trek: The Next Generation. And my wonderful brother Daniel died with pancreatic cancer 24 years ago. They opened him up, they diagnosed, they said, you've got 6 months to live. And that was it. He died 4 months later. And at that time, there was a 3% survival rate. Since then, we've grown to the embarrassingly high number of 10%. But a dear friend of mine, and probably all of yours, Kitty Swink, is one of those 10%. She has survived pancreatic cancer for 17 going on 18 years. Pancreatic cancer is the third leading cause of cancer-related deaths in the United States, with a 5-year survival rate. That's just 10%. And more than 60,000 Americans are estimated to be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2021. More than 48,000 will die from the disease. Because symptoms are often vague and can be hard to detect. That's why I'm supporting the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, the leading patient advocacy organization committed to fighting the world's toughest cancer. PanCan is working hard to create outcomes for this devastating disease through its groundbreaking research in early detection and better treatment options. PanCan drives progress by funding life-saving research, providing personalized patient services, and creating a community of supporters and volunteers like you who will stop at nothing to create a world in which all pancreatic cancer patients will thrive. You can help support our important mission by donating today at pancan.org. Thanks for your time.
We now return to Trek Untold.
All right, so Amanda, let's go ahead and jump into our Star Trek discussion here because we got a lot to talk about there. So you came on board as a background artist, and I'm very excited also. I mentioned I'm really into the animation stuff, but I've always been really curious about background art because it's a very difficult thing to do also. I remember one of my earliest jobs I applied to at an animation house was in fact for a background artist, and I went in there thinking like, I know what I'm doing. And no, like in 20 minutes I was crying basically. It was horrible. So we're going to get into just the yeah, it was not a good day for Matthew, but we're gonna get into that in a little bit. But I gotta ask first, when it comes to Star Trek shows, when I speak to a lot of actors in this podcast, most of them don't know they're auditioning for a Star Trek show. It's very, very top secret. So I'm wondering if it's the same for folks who are doing basically ancillary things like working in animation. Did you know that you were coming on board for a Star Trek show the minute you got this gig?
That's so interesting. I did not know that the voice actors didn't know what
A
they were
lot of them
auditioning
didn't know, yeah,
for.
voice actors and live action actors too.
Wow, I didn't know that. I'm learning something from you today. A lot of times if you get reached out to by a recruiter from a studio and it's a project that hasn't been announced yet, especially if it's a high profile project like Star Trek, what they'll do is they'll send you an email just kind of asking what your availability is. And they say that there's a project and would you be available to work on it? Would you want to hear more? And you can respond and say, yes, I am available and you can please tell me more about this project. And what they'll do is they'll send you a non-disclosure agreement to sign. You'll sign it and say, I'm not gonna post any information on the internet. I'm not gonna tell anyone. I'm not gonna tell my cat about it. You send that back and they'll tell you a surprise. It's Star Trek. We want to, we'd like you to start working on that. In this case, however, season 1, I did freelance for the first season of Lower Decks, and at that point, it was already announced. So there was no need to be, secretive. When they asked me to work on it, they're just like, it's Star Trek. Do you want to work on it or not? And it was, of course, a big yes.
Now, looking at your resume too, you've done a lot of different things in animation, which I'm going to talk to you about a little bit later as well. But had you ever done background art before in any capacity? I mean, I guess a transferable skill would be like, if you had done landscapes or things like that. But was background art even something that was in your mindset?
I jumped around a lot in my previous jobs, whether it was character design or color design. I mostly started off as a color designer, but I had done a few shows. I was a background painter on a few shows before going on Lower Decks. And the first show that I did that for was Home Adventures with Tip and O at DreamWorks. And that was also a show where I started off as a color designer. And then at some point, asked to be given the chance to do some background painting and see if I could, get a little promotion and get bumped up. So I did do a few background paintings for that show. I did some background paintings for a company called Strange Beast that is over in London, and I did backgrounds for these animated commercials for a mortgage company. So I briefly did that, and then at DreamWorks later on, I worked on a show called Cleopatra in Space. Again, doing color design, but also doing background painting, and I loved working on that show. The backgrounds were just so fun to work on because that show also takes place in space. So there was a lot of like spaceships and planets and stars, and I love painting that stuff. So I think that was the last show I did backgrounds on before going on to Lower Decks.
So tell us a little bit about what the workflow is at Titmouse when you're doing a show, especially because you're doing background art. So I'm not even sure like how to even place you into the process. So normally I'd ask my guests, start to finish, how's the process? But that's a really long discussion in animation. So I guess more so, yeah. So more so, where does your job fit into the workflow?
So color and background paint are kind of like the last leg of the design pipeline. So once, they get the black and white, characters and props and effects, and our layout team does the black and white, lined backgrounds, that'll all get transferred over to the color team. So the color designer will put color on the characters and effects and all their lighting, and the background paint team, kind of just to break that down a little bit further, when we get layouts and things like that, our color paint supervisor, Claire Length, she'll usually do what are called color keys. So she'll take some of the key backgrounds that we'll have for an episode, and she'll just do a really quick, rough color pass on them, just to kind of give us a starting point, like, oh, it's going to be, nighttime, and we want this to be purple and this to be blue and this to be that. And so it's just like a nice, jumping off point for when we actually get the file and we start doing paint. And from there, we'll, paint the backgrounds and specific to our production, we have our main background painters on in the LA is Titmouse, even though it's work from home, so everyone's everywhere. But like we have our main background paint team, and we'll do kind of the key establishing shots. And then from there, things will get shipped to our Vancouver paint team, and our Vancouver studio will do any of the additional background paintings, from the establishing shots. So if there's an establishing shot of a city and they go into the city and there's other views of the city, they'll use our keys to paint the rest of the shots. And then from there, I think usually goes on to animation and other things that are more complicated.
Now, looking at when you kind of started professionally in animation, I think it's safe to say that you probably haven't had to work much using like traditional cells and hand painting backgrounds or hand painting any artwork like that, right?
No, I think I just missed that era when I got into animation. I wonder if it's something that, any sort of show in the industry would bring back at some point, because I think doing hand painted backgrounds would be really fun. I think, if I'm not mistaken, SpongeBob SquarePants still does hand painted backgrounds. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that one. But yeah, everything we do is digital. So specific to lower decks, we mainly use Photoshop to paint our backgrounds in.
Photoshop is a big one. That's pretty much an industry standard also. But generally speaking, for what you do, what are the tools of the trade that you guys use? I mean, I know you mentioned that you got a Cintiq and you just mentioned Photoshop, but really, what are all the tools that your department is going to be specializing in?
Well, definitely Cintiqs, definitely need those. We need color correct monitors so that we make sure all the colors are coming out, crisp and correct. And the worst thing is working on a file and realizing that your monitor was leaning towards green a little bit too much, and you turn it in and it's like, oh, it's really green. I didn't mean it to happen. So those are kind of the hardware that we need. Really good computers with very good graphics cards and good RAM, because Photoshop eats RAM like crazy. And program wise, Photoshop. And I guess I would say Adobe. I use Adobe Bridge a lot. I know that's kind of just more for file management, but it's really good using that. And so you can just kind of see all the thumbnails of all the different backgrounds you're working on and help organize the files. And I think those are the main tools that I use.
So in my experiences, I know that a lot of times storyboard artists will also have to do some animation typically. They might have to do some animatics, which are basically just animating elements of the storyboards. So sometimes there is crossover in the industry. Is there ever any crossover with basically you having to maybe animate something in the background or anything like that? Or are you just strictly focused on the backgrounds?
I am strictly focused on the backgrounds. I would be so useless helping the animators do anything. It's not something that I'm really good at. The only thing that I got to do on lower decks that was a little bit outside of background painting was painting some of the CG models of the ships. We had the Vulcan cruiser in one episode, and we had the Packlid, the large Packlid ship. And this was the first time I ever did this on a show. It was something where I went into it just like, oh, I don't want to do that. When you paint ships, it's like painting cars. Ooh. But I ended up like really enjoying it. I basically would get a JPEG or a still image of the 3D model and a 3/4 and a 3/4 back of like a spaceship, and it would just be kind of in black and white, gray. I think it would have a shadow render on it or some ambient occlusion. It was but it wouldn't be painted at all. So I would take that and add all the color on it and go in and add all the little scratches and the wear and tear on the edges, and getting to think about things like, oh, if there's like if there's like things coming out of like the weapons and it's really hot, then maybe it would be a little bit burned on the edges there, and maybe it would just have some dents here and there from different rocks and space debris hitting it. So it was fun kind of like telling this little story through the texturing on this ship. And I was always really proud of the end result. It always looked really cool, and so now I'm kind of like a little bit of a spaceship nerd, or I just get really excited if I get to paint one.
All All right, so I know that we did a pre-interview earlier, and you kind of talked to me about how you're pretty much a hardcore Trekkie, and we got to start now telling the fans how much of a hardcore Trekkie you are. And let's talk about some specific backgrounds that you worked on here. That's nothing to be worried about. We're not going to be, going too nerdy here, but we're going to get a little bit nerdy.
Okay,
And so, yeah, so let's talk about a few specific things. So you mentioned, you basically sent me a list of some of the ones that you worked on yourself for Lower Deck Season 1 and 2. So we're just going to kind of run through a few and see what you remember about working on them. And one of the ones you told me you were really proud of was the Cardassian interrogation room.
Yeah.
You're already excited. Good.
I just like that background a lot. And I like that episode of Next Gen a lot too. I think that was the very first background I did on season 2. And I remember we had a meeting and we were kind of breaking down who was going to get which shot. And, we had just all watched the animatic together. And I remember just being like, interrogation room. Oh, we're going to give the interrogation room to Amanda. And I was like, yes. It's just such a great reference. I love that. I love that episode so much with the 4 lights, and I wanted to do such a good job and make it look exactly like the room from the show. And I remember looking up all these references on Google, just trying to make sure that the walls were the correct shade of blue, purple, and that the lights looked especially bright and hypnotic. And yeah, I definitely, if it's a background that kind of has some sort of reference to the live action shows or movies, I just get super excited about it.
And you also mentioned to me that you're a big fan of the Vulcans, and going down this kind of alien pathway here. You did the Vulcan cruiser as well, and that was a nice looking background. I really like that one too. Tell me about working on that one.
Yeah, I had the opportunity of not only getting to paint the color of the exterior of the Vulcan cruiser, I also got to do some of the interior backgrounds, which included the bridge itself and also the science lab. And we had reference for the science lab. I believe that reference was from Star Trek Enterprise. If I get that wrong, I'm sorry, but I believe that's what that reference is from. And the bridge, I don't think I had any reference for that. I think I just had to base the colors on that based on what the color palette was in the science lab. But it was such a treat working on those backgrounds. I do love the Vulcans very much, second to how much I love the Romulans. So being able to do some backgrounds that were related to my favorite Star Trek race was such a treat.
Now, we mentioned earlier in this interview about one of the harder things for you to kind of get your head around was perspective. With Cardassians, especially, there's all sorts of different angles and things, so you're going to deal with a lot of weird perspective. With backgrounds, if your perspective is wrong, the whole thing is basically kind of ruined, ultimately. So, what kind of things do you need to look at and think about when you're doing these types of backgrounds and keeping things in perspective?
Luckily as a painter, I don't really have to worry about that because that's really more of the background layout team's job, is to do the line art and figure out the perspective and things. But as a painter, you do have to enhance that, to enhance what they've put down. So you can definitely use color and your values in order to push the perspective even further. With things that are far away, they're a little bit more faded, and things that are up close, your values and your contrasts are a bit stronger. So yeah, I definitely feel like it's certain skills you have to make sure you're really hitting in order to make sure that things look correct, and look kind of realistic, or not necessarily realistic, but that the forms are reading correctly, and that you can kind of tell what you're looking at without things kind of getting confusing.
Now, one of the ones that I think you did was really, really awesome. I know fans love this one, was on Qualor. You did a bunch of backgrounds on that planet. It's basically like the Las Vegas in space, and there's a ton of nerdy stuff hiding in that. So talk about what you did on Qualor, which that in itself sounds like a phrase that should be on a t-shirt. But yeah, what'd you do on Qualor?
Yeah, let's talk about Qualor. So that was another one where, Claire gave me some color keys to work off of for that one. And it was very needed because especially that establishing shot where Tendi and Mariner are walking into the street, and you just see this vast, immense neon lit, strip of stores and shopping areas. And it was so detailed. That was probably the background that took me the most time of any background I've ever worked on. And having Claire's color keys was just so helpful. But I remember at that time I was, I think that was during Christmas this last year. And it was during the pandemic, and I think a lot of us were kind of, having a tough Christmas. None of us were. I wasn't with my family during this last Christmas, and so I just remember that was kind of what I was working on, was all those Qualor shots. And I remember having all these Christmas movies on while I was working on it. I think I went through all of the Santa Claus movies, all of the Home Alone movies. I think specifically for the Qualor, shopping strip, it was the Grinch with the Jim Carrey movie. So I like to think that, chaotic, colorful movie kind of helped with like really pushing some of the colors in that shot. The other fun thing about those Qualor backgrounds, and you can especially see it in the down shot of the city, where you can see the water and the port and everything. I started, that's the episode where I kind of started doing a lot of like vertical kind of lens flares on the backgrounds, just because I thought like it would really sell the neon lights kind of aspect of it. And it turned out, my supervisor and my art director like really liked how that looked. So they ended up, in future backgrounds, anytime we had like kind of lit, glows or neon lights, they'd be like, oh, let's put more of those like vertical flares. And so I feel really, I feel really like chuffed that I got to, add some very specific, something specific to me to the show. I partially did them because it was my little, secret homage to the J.J. Abrams movies with the horizontal lens flares that he would put everywhere. And I was like, just put vertical ones. They'll be unique to us.
And another super duper nerdy one that I know a lot of fans loved seeing was the interior of the collector's ship. And that is just, again, filled with all sorts of references. So, even go back into Qualor 2 and now talk about this one here. When you're making these like various references in the background, is that you calling that shot, or is it like someone else saying, put this here, put that there?
I'm not sure who the exact person is who is making those decisions. I have a feeling it's Mike. He's kind of like has the encyclopedic knowledge of like all of the Star Trek. So, but I do remember receiving a PDF file for the collector's ship. And I think it was 10 pages long or something. And it was just all this very specific references with pictures and names of like what everything was, so that we would stay on track, with what everything was and what the color should be for it, which was very useful. As much as I do, enjoy Star Trek, and I've watched a lot of Star Trek in my time, there were some references that I was like, I have no idea what this is. No idea. So, but it was so fun doing it, just knowing that, the fans got to watch and kind of play, find the reference and, point out what Easter eggs they could find. And yeah, that was a really great, a great background to work off of.
Yeah, those are some really, really fun ones. And I was really excited to find out also that you told me that you are responsible for Cetacean Ops. And that is one that's been like in Star Trek nerddom for quite some time. Like once people discovered that existed, everybody's like, what does it look like? And you basically finally got to show what that really looks like. So tell me about Cetacean Ops. What's it like being, I'm going to call you the first officer of Cetacean Ops because you basically made it. So what was it like working on that one?
That one was really fun. One of the things I like the most in background painting, obviously just with the flares and everything, is I love lighting effects. I love doing glows. I love doing, reflections. I love doing like different lights, backlighting things. And Cetacean Ops was really fun to work on because I got to do that kind of refracted light kind of on the ceiling and hitting the walls and things like that. Getting that water to have like that really nice glow effect on it was really fun to work on. And I remember I was really excited to get that shot because I remember watching the animatic and just cracking up at those porpoises, beluga, I think they're beluga whales, the beluga whales trying to coax Rutherford into the water. I was really excited to get that shot, and I was very happy with how well received that scene was with the fans, and was excited that I got to be a part of that one.
So how much say does Paramount actually have in what you do and what ultimately gets used on screen? Like, is there actually someone from the studio who gets a final approval on all the different backgrounds and assets that you guys are working on?
Oh, okay. That one is a question I'm not sure how to answer, just because I really don't know. I imagine, like most things, especially, any sort of high profile franchise that's been around for a long time, that a studio is really protective of. They have a lot of say in what goes into every episode and what's getting referenced. And I think just within the show itself, Mike is our final say, and what get put into an episode and what the little references are and everything. But beyond him, I'm sure there's a team of, who knows, executives, lawyers, I'm not sure, in the Paramount side that gets to kind of like really, really hone in and have the final say on what gets put onto the show. But I'm not exactly sure how that process goes.
Well, you personally, I mean, have you ever had to basically redraw something entirely because they were like, oh, we can't use this in this shot, or we can't use this thing over here? Like, has that ever happened to you on the show?
Not on Lower Decks, no. On other shows I've worked on, yes. I remember working on Home Adventures with Tippino, and we did a series of mailmen for an episode. And I remember as a color designer, I made their outfits, blue, like mailmen. And I think our designer had put like a little eagle or something on one of the bags. And we did get a note later from the lawyers, like, no, you can't do that. Like, that's, that's an established like thing. Like, we could get sued for that. Their outfits can't be blue. You can't have eagles on the bags. And it was like, oh, okay. And so we had to like go and redo those things. And that kind of thing happens a lot in animation, where sometimes you're on top of things and you're like, oh yeah, no, we wouldn't be able to do that. That's a copyright thing. But they do have teams of lawyers and things, overseeing things on the other side that will let us know if we've overstepped in some way. But so far on Lower Decks, especially with backgrounds, I haven't encountered that yet.
Well, I'm going to deduce that because the background art is just basically towards the end of the process. They've probably like worked out everything by the time it even gets in your hands. So I would assume you probably don't even have to worry about that kind of stuff happening.
Yeah, and also it's like we don't have to worry about copyright because it's Star Trek and we have the rights to it. So,
So I mean, how would you say that working on Lower Decks is different from other shows that you worked on?
There's definitely more pressure, just because of how beloved the franchise is and how exact everything has to be. There's definitely this pressure of making sure it looks good and making sure things are accurate. And there was one, I as a fan, I always try and make sure that I'm painting things correctly. We do get PDFs with like the Easter eggs and things like that, but sometimes we don't, and sometimes it's just I just have to be kind of aware. There was one spaceship that was in some parking lot that I did. I'm not going to mention which one it was, but I painted one of the ships in the parking lot incorrectly. And it was later after the episode had streamed, and there was somebody on Twitter kind of pointed out, because of course our fans are so eagle-eyed, they'll catch everything. And it wasn't a mean thing. They were just kind of like, oh, this ship's usually this color, and it was painted this color. And I was like, oh my God, I was so mortified as a fan. I was so embarrassed. I probably took it too hard. I was just, I felt so bad that I misrepresented a piece of Star Trek to the fans. But the beautiful thing about our fans is that they're just so sweet. Like none of them, nobody was criticizing us for miscoloring this one ship. So, and I think that's also what sets this show so separately from other shows I've worked on are the fans themselves, and just the kind of feedback and appreciation and love that we get from the fans. And I think it was a few weeks ago I had retweeted one of the backgrounds I had done. It was the bridge from Wrath of Khan, and I was just like, hey, I painted this, very proud of it. And just this flood, I was not expecting the flood of fans just wanting to say how much they loved it, how much they loved the episode, how much they loved the show. People saying thank you for making this show. It was just very, very touching and very heartwarming. And yeah, I've never experienced that on another show, and it just makes this show feel so special.
And I was one of those people that were part of that social media avalanche that found you because of that post. So yeah, thank you for putting it up there. So Amanda, what would you say would be the most time-consuming background you had to make on Lower Decks so far?
Oh, definitely the Qualor one. The Qualor Street with all the lights and everything. Definitely that one.
So in terms of like when I say time consuming also, for folks who don't know how long this process takes, how long does it take you to make a single background, and which ones would take you the most hours or days even to do?
It's hard to say. Sometimes a background will go by really quickly, depending on, you're just whether you're really honed in or not, or just feeling, artists. Sometimes we feel like working really hard and we're really focused, and other times we're just kind of, feeling a little tired and wanting to take a break. I think for the most part, depending on the complexity of a background, they could take anywhere from half a day to 3 days, depending on how complex they are. Definitely, we have some establishing shots in lower decks with any of the space stations where it's all like the really rendered space station with all the little lights and all the little windows and things like that, and large planets. I know for a fact those ones can sometimes take days. Whereas there's backgrounds like I did the background of the sonic showers for one of the episodes, and that one took me, I don't know, hour and a half, 2 hours tops. It was just such a simple background that it took less time. So it's really a range depending on complexity.
Now, I know that the animators, the storyboard artists, a lot of the production team will have like a style guide with rules they have to follow, certain things they can do, certain things they're supposed to do, ways to basically keep the characters and everything in it grounded in that reality. So when it comes to the background art, do you have the same set of rules that you have to follow, like a certain set of colors or tones or values that you have to use, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, once, especially after the first episode came out, there's, a style guide for what the colors of the Jeffries tubes, the warp core, the bridge, the colors we use for the chairs and the ready room. Everything has to be documented so that we can keep continuously, matching that and staying true to the colors that were established in the first episode. And so we definitely have to be careful of that. If it's a new environment, we can kind of get a little bit more creative. But anytime we're doing backgrounds for the Cerritos, especially, it's like we have to go back and refer to those backgrounds to make sure that we're keeping things consistent.
Yeah, I imagine it can be probably a little bit stifling sometimes because you do have to stay so consistent with what those guidelines are. But you kind of mentioned a few times earlier, like, how you were doing the Qualor backgrounds that were inspired by Jim Carrey's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. So, my question...
Well, I don't know, that's a little far.
That's a stretch of interpretation, I guess, but, it kind of like...
kept me motivated.
Okay, we'll go with that. But I guess, kind of my follow-up to that thought is, how do you get to put your creativity and your personality into these backgrounds?
Definitely, like I said before, with the getting to add my own little flair to things, like with the vertical flares, I get to add a little spark every once in a while. Again, I really love adding glow effects and special lighting, especially with, sometimes on spaceships and things like that, especially in Star Trek, things can be a little beige and gray. And I'll always try and find a way to push things into a more colorful direction so that we can, get a little bit more interest into the shot with interesting uplighting or, one of the things I do is, can this glow? Can I make this glow? And it's just anything I can make have some sort of glow effect, I'll put a glow on it. Yeah, and especially with the flares, the vertical flares, again, it was just really nice that, I had an idea for something and it was received well by my supervisor and my art director, and it was carried over into future episodes. So
now, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but, I've talked to guys who were even like editors or VFX people on the new Star Trek shows, and they've gotten to spend time with like Jonathan Frakes or other cast members or some of the actors, producers, whatever. But, you guys are working basically in your bubble at Titmouse, where you don't really get to interact with these people. So, you don't get to have those same experiences, but you do get to have something else that we don't, and that's really first access to a lot of things that we have to wait months to see. So, for example, having Commander Riker suddenly show up in Lower Decks and having Ensign Sonia Gomez finally show up as Captain Sonia Gomez. So, I'm curious, I imagine that you guys all get together and watch the final exports once they're all done. So, how much of a secret is it? Like what kind of reaction is there when you guys see like Riker on screen for the first time in years ever on the Titan?
I mean, it's definitely really exciting. We know pretty far ahead in the production, like who's going to be in episodes. especially since when the animatic comes out, sometimes the voiceover work is already there. So we'll be able to be like, oh, that's so they got Jonathan Frakes to do Riker, ooh, it's so exciting. And like, so we, we do get to know ahead of time, like who's gonna be like a voice actor for our show. And it's always very, very exciting. I think my favorite voice actor guest that we had in season 2 was Jeffrey Combs. I was a huge fan of his when he was Wayun on Deep Space Nine, and just he has such a range as an actor. Watching Deep Space Nine, you just see some random alien come in and have a line, and you just be like, is that Jeffrey Combs? Is that Jeffrey Combs? And he played like so many different characters. And so when I saw that he was going to be playing that little like evil computer in that one episode, I was just ecstatic. I was so excited that we got him to do a voice on the show. But yeah, it is a bummer, if we were working in the studio and not doing the work from home thing, and the pandemic wasn't an issue, we'd all probably have more of a chance of being able to like meet these actors when they came in to do their voiceover work. But it depends. Sometimes actors have their own recording studios that they prefer to go to. But there were a few times when I was working at Titmouse in Hollywood, working on Moonbeam City, that some actors did actually come in to record at our studio. And so that was a real treat being able to meet some of them.
Your resume shows you as someone who has done a lot of different types of work in the industry, like we alluded to earlier, and how you've already talked about a few of those things that you did. So, to kind of recap, you've done visual development, you've done character design, you've done color design, and right now in Lower Decks, you're doing background art. So that's, I feel like, a pretty uncommon thing to have somebody in the industry just jumping around into so many different positions. Because normally it's like you're kind of just doing the one thing and staying within your lane, essentially. But you're really spread out. So what do you attribute to the ability to be that flexible?
Getting bored so easily, I guess.
That's a good answer.
I think I do have a tendency to need novelty in my work. I when I was doing color design, that was fun for a while, but then I was like, oh, I want to try something else. I want to try character designs and background painting. And I think I was kind of the special case where, I really did want to narrow down which one of those things to focus on, but I never could. It was always, an art director would prefer me for character designs, and another art director would prefer me for background painting. And as work became available, and my connections expanded, it was very split in the middle, what I'd be known for amongst my colleagues. And so, it was just like, it just kind of happened that way. It was just like a weird, I became a jack of all trades unintentionally, but also somewhat intentionally. And it's great because it means that I don't have to limit myself to one thing on my resume. And so if there's, a dry spell and I can't find any background painting work, I could always go into, ask if there's some character design work. But it is a rare thing. Typically artists in our industry have their focus, and that's what they just kind of narrow in on. And I'm a bit of an oddity for that.
So for anybody who's listening today that is someone who's aspiring to work in the animation industry, is there any kind of advice you would tell them to prep themselves for a future working in it?
I'm trying to think of how I got in the industry, and it was so roundabout. I went back to school and I just got an internship, but that not everyone has that, ability to go back to school and pay for school just to get their foot in the door. I'd say maybe, especially trying to get into the industry, a lot of it is based on people that you know. And your skill is obviously very important. And I know people who have strong internet presences on Twitter and Instagram and things like that. It also helps. But definitely be prepared to be good to work with, and to make connections and not be too introverted. It's just making your connections is probably like the best way to kind of get your foot in the door and get into the industry. And just being pleasant to work with in general is great, because it is what gets people to call you back, because they want you on their team, because they enjoy working with you. So I would say, any opportunity you have to make your connections in the industry is important. And I think one of the ways to do that is to definitely take classes. Anything that you're interested in learning about, whether it is perspective or storyboarding or background painting, taking courses on it, especially if it's led by teachers who work in the industry themselves. for instance, Concept Design Academy in Los Angeles is a great example because they have a lot of teachers that are industry professionals. And I know lots of people that took those courses and then got jobs in the industry because the teacher liked their work so much. So definitely whatever opportunities you can to get yourself out there and be seen and make those connections is really important. And don't rely too much on trying to get followers and likes and whatever's on Twitter. Just, also try and make your connections as well.
All right, so Amanda, for folks who want to learn more about what you're doing and want to follow your career and especially follow you on social media, how can people do that?
Well, I have an Instagram. It's probably the best place to follow me if you're interested in my artwork. It is Manderdoodle, all one word. And I do have a Twitter account. I post art on there sometimes, but mostly I'm posting memes and jokes, and I don't expect anybody to really want to follow that. So my Instagram, again, is Manderdoodle if you'd like to follow me for my art.
So everybody out there, go ahead, follow Amanda on social media there. Give her all the follows and give her memes all the likes.
Yeah, give me memes.
So Amanda, last thing for today, I feel like you actually kind of already answered this earlier in the interview, but I'm just going to ask it again because that's how we do things here. What's the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
What isn't the best part about it? I mean, it's just what feels so good about being a part of the Star Trek universe is like, as a fan, just being a part of it is what feels really good. And the fans themselves, I feel like to me, that's always been the best part of Star Trek is the fan base and being a fan. And it always takes me back to one of my favorite scenes in Lower Decks. And it was in, I think, season 1, but it was when all of the characters like Mariner and Boimler and everyone was in the bunks, and they're doing the engine noises, and they're all, debating what the warp core engine noise sounds like. And like Tendi jumps in at one point and she was like, "Are we all doing the engine noises?" And to me, that just kind of, fully encompassed like the joy I felt of even working on the show. It's the joy that they were feeling working on a starship is so similar to the joy I felt of working on the show. And to me, like, that's the best part, is just being a part of it, being a part of this universe.
That's a great answer. All right. So yeah, and just want to remind folks out there listening, by the way, now to totally embarrass you here, but this is Amanda's first time doing a podcast, and I just want to say you did an excellent job here dealing with all my terrible questions and making sense of it all.
I hope so. I was so nervous. I was so nervous.
No, you did a great job, and it's so great that if you're on season 3, then we totally should have you come back and do this for 3 or 4 hours. How about that?
Oh boy, I can't wait.
I can feel the excitement. But yeah,
awesome.
Amanda, again, thank you so much for coming by and telling us all about this. Again, this is a part of animation that I know very little about, and I think a lot of my listeners probably also, it's something that they kind of take for granted in a cartoon. And I feel like it's really great to meet the person behind it and learn about what you do, how you do it, and also just to know that you are a Trekkie, you're a part of this world, and you are part of the Star Trek family now. So thank you so much for all your time today, Amanda.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for having me.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Trek Untold, which is just one word in all those platforms. If you're listening to this on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or any of those other locations, please leave a positive review and a 5-star rating if you can to help show other listeners how much you like this podcast and spread the word. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel at youtube.com/nerdnewstoday. If you're enjoying Trek Untold and in a position to financially support the show, I hope you consider being one of our Patreon supporters by visiting patreon.com/trekuntold, where you can help us out for as low as $2 a month and get some pretty sweet perks. Shout out once again to Triple Fiction Productions, who you can check out at triple-fictionproductions.net. If you're a collector of Star Trek toys in any size or scale, or enjoy prop replicas, you're going to love the quality of their 3D printed products, and I'm sure you will be a repeat customer. If you have any comments, feedback, or suggestions for future guests, send an email to me at trekuntold@gmail.com. I hope you'll beam up again with us next week for another episode of Trek Untold. So until then, I'm Matthew. Thanks for listening, and remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the RageWorks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.